Hey everyone, how's it going? Good morning. I'm here with the fantastic Oz Noy, who's I'm so happy that he's joining us right now. So let me run down Oz's group, the people who he has performed and toured with, which is really amazing. I think he's one of my favorite guitar players in New York. Seen him many times, whether you knew it or not. Oz, I was in the audience at the bitter end many times. Okay, Richard Bona, Chris Botti, Kevin DeGraw, Harry Belafonte, Cindy Lauper, Clay Aiken, Akiko Yano, Wonder Girls, Tony Braxton, Phoebe Snow, Nile Rodgers, Mike Clark, Jeff Chain Watts, Dave Weckel, Mike Marineri, John Patitucci, East Village. I can keep on going, man. You've played with a lot of great people for a really good reason because pretty spectacular. So thanks for joining us today. We have Phil moderating today, Phil Mingan. Thanks, Phil, as always. And we have links. Oz has a lot of educational material and records and things. They're all available on his website, and the link is in my description. All my TrueFire courses are 25% off. And through if you go to my site there too. And all right, so that's enough of the pitches. Oh, one thing I want to say: we've been doing the live things. I'm going to take the month of August off for the live interviews, just because I've been doing it since March. And they're going to come back, and when I come back in September, we have Kirk Fletcher, Greg Hall, Rick Beato, Keith. Everybody's coming in. So just taking a little time off. Okay, Oz, here we are. Thanks, man. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
And so today we're going to just start off as always with a little lesson. You want to talk about we talked about ahead of time, major scales and working on some rhythmic ideas and some things that you can do to help grow your playing.
Yeah. Well, I have a pretty basic idea of an exercise that I think it's really helpful. The thing about playing guitar is a lot of it has to do with, I don't know exactly what the cage system is, but I'm guessing it's those little 4 frets. It's like those little sections on the neck, correct?
Yeah.
Something like that. So I never learned like that, but most of the shapes that you learn as a guitar player are very vertical. Like you play here, you play in a position, which there's nothing wrong with that. But what you really want to do is you open up the neck. You want to be able to play from here to here, You want to open up the neck. You want to be able to see where everything is at all times. So one exercise that I think is good to do is, let's say if we just take a major scale. Well, you can do it on any scale. That's the cool thing about it. But let's say you study a major scale. You study, let's say C major, just to be really simple. So you study the shapes of the C major all over the scale, and then if you have a loop pedal or a freeze pedal or something, that will help just to put a chord that you can hear what it does. And what I would do is first of all, there's 2 things about it. One is just opening up the neck where you can play all over the guitar. But the other thing is rhythm, where guitar players are normally lacking rhythm because it's not the main thing that we do. So I would just put a metronome, and the first thing I would do is I would play a major scale with a metronome and just try to play it rhythmically. And you'll see that it sounds more like music than a scale. So if this is the metronome, that's kind of boring, correct? Even if you do different rhythms, it's still boring. But what happens if you really think about rhythms when you go up and down the scale? So now I've been just trying to play different rhythms, but all I was doing was going up and down the scale all over the neck. That's a really good exercise because it doesn't only develop your like the way you see the scale all over the neck, but it also you start be aware of rhythm. So I would recommend just doing that as the first step. And the second step is once you have that down, you feel kind of comfortable, then you can just choose, again, it could be with any scale, but you choose, let's say I'll do it on a major scale, I'll put a chord in, like a C major chord, and then I'll put a metronome, and I'll try just to develop melodies, thinking about rhythms, but really just moving all over the neck, almost randomly, you know what I mean? Is you just try to go for stuff, and I think that's really good. It opens up a lot of just things, you know, in your playing. So if I just do this, oh, I'm sorry. There you go. So that's a C major chord, yeah? So if I put a metronome, so as you can see, what I did is oh, sorry. So, you know, the rhythmical part of it is important because that's the one thing that we're not really thinking or aware of when we play, you know what I mean? Like, unless somebody tells you to be aware of it. And that mixed with the fact that, you know, it's kind of, you know, you're randomly trying to develop melodies over a scale, obviously, but trying to play more horizontally than in a position. I think if you start working like that, that will open up your playing a lot.
Yeah, sorry.
And it develops the understanding of the fretboard and rhythm all together.
I agree. At one point, I saw an interview or a little thing that you talked about where you did a major scale, and I teach this on two notes at a time. So you're.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because, you know, for people just jumping into this, you're moving around. Is there a way you can develop, opposed to learning 3-note per string major scale fingerings, which you all do? But you talked about a 2-note thing on a string that I thought was really great, and I teach that as well. And I felt that really opened everything up for me. If you can talk about that for a sec for me.
Yeah, well, you can play scales in different numbers per string. Meaning, obviously, if you play 3-note per string, I'll do it on F because that's easy. So, playing F 3-note per string, that's pretty much very vertical, you know. What I do is I play it from each degree of the scale, so it'll basically be like you're playing modes, you know. So that's the first degree, all 3-note per string. Second degree, third degree. So that covers the whole neck pretty widely, you know. I can do it and talk to you pretty much, you know, because I'm used to doing it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a 3-note, but when you play 3 notes, it's very vertical, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but again, we want to kind of open up the guitar in different directions, so the neck. So the second one that I do is 4-note per string, that really opens up the neck horizontally. So the way I do it is I slide the first finger. That's what leads. So if this is F. So you see I slide the first finger on every string.
Yeah.
So what it does, that really opens up the neck. So you get from here. Too early. So from here to here, you get pretty quick. So again, it's the same thing. So you do that, and then you do it from each degree of the scale. And the 2-note per string is the same idea. You just have to do it an octave up. But if this is F, then it'll be. And that's basically still playing horizontally, but backwards, you know? So again, and I'll do it from each degree of the scale. So that's pretty much what it is. And I just do it as exercises. If you want to, like just a warm-up exercise. If you want to learn a scale really thoroughly, that's a really good way of doing it. You know.
No.
And again, what it does, it gives you the options whether you have lines or not. It just gives you the options to just kind of start moving around the neck in a more, let's say, exciting way. I don't know.
Well, yeah, it opens up the fingerboard so you don't feel like you're playing as positionally, and it's a really excellent way to practice it. Now, when you were doing the rhythmic variations, were you just improvising those, or did you have rhythmic ideas?
Yes.
Okay. So
just improvise. The thing about rhythm with guitar players is, you know, we're lacking rhythm because we, as guitar players, that's the last thing we deal with. You know, like drummers, the only thing they deal with is rhythm. Let's say instruments that are monophonic, they have notes and then they have rhythm. They can play chords, but for guitar or even piano, you know, the first thing we do is we'll play some melodies, we'll shred as fast as we can. And then the second thing we do is we play chords, but the rhythm thing is always in the background. You don't really, nobody was talking to me about rhythm when I went to a guitar teacher, really, you know what I mean? It's kind of and it's a really big part of your, really your phrasing, you know? So I don't have any specific rhythms that I think about, but once you start being aware of it and you're also getting used to playing with a metronome, then that kind of opens things up, you know? I don't do any fancy rhythm exercises or anything like that. I don't even know much about it in terms of, like, I don't know much about polyrhythms and all that kind of stuff, you know?
It's interesting because you're playing extremely rhythmic, so a lot of what you're doing is just what you're hearing and improvising and just come up with those rhythmic ideas, which is cool because I in my mind I thought that you knew all about the polyrhythms and you had worked on that kind of stuff just based upon how rhythmic your playing is.
I think I know about polyrhythms because I play with enough players that do a lot of that stuff, so I'm used to it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You play with jazz guys that do really complex stuff, so you just gotta hang in there. So you just learn to kind of understand how those rhythms sounds, you know. But I don't know if I would probably have to take a class to really understand how,
right.
Like to learn it really, you know.
Hey, I got a favor to ask you because I think we're figuring out because the lights keep on going. Can you close your blinds?
I don't think it's gonna do. I'll do it.
Let's give it a shot. Yeah, maybe. Thanks. That would be great. So while he closes the blind, I'll just start singing. It's live. Oh yeah, they're pretty soothing. We'll see how it works. Might make it better.
Is it better?
It seems to be. We'll see what happens. No, it kind of half and half. It is what it is, man. All right, cool. It's funny. Like nobody really wants blackout blinds in New York because it's so dark in apartments half the time anyway, right?
Nobody exactly. One light. I have plenty of light here, but you know, this is up and down.
All right. Well, we did what we could. It is what it is, guys. So we started talking ahead of time. So what have you been doing? You know, obviously since everything's been shut down, you were saying that you were playing in the park. Yeah.
Well, what happened is once the weather started getting good in New York and things got better, I just thought about it. I have the Yamaha makes these little amps. They're great. I usually, when I go on tour, I put them in my suitcase. And the new one that they make, it's called TR or THR30. Mm-hmm. And it's awesome. Like, it's such a great tool for everything. Like, you can plug your computer to it and listen to music. You can practice with it. But it's just loud enough to play a soft gig. You know what I mean? So I live by 2 parks. I live on the Upper West Side. So I just go to one of the parks with an upright player and a drummer, and we play. The amp works on batteries, so we set up in a corner somewhere, and we play standards.
That's awesome.
For an hour or two, it's great. It's been saving my mental and mental state more than anything, and I keep my chops, really, you know.
Well, that's the biggest thing, with everybody who's been on the show, and myself included. It's like no gigs, and there's just a certain thing that only gigs can provide you in terms of chops, and you can't get them from practicing at home, and the mental aspect of it too, man. So I think Josh Smith was saying that when you did a gig at the Baked Potato, and everybody's time was really funky too, because people haven't been, on top of playing together, So everything feels kind of different.
When I did it for the first time, it felt really weird for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then it was back to normal. And now I think the thing that felt really weird to me was, even if you play with an amp in the house, you don't really move any air. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really happen because it's just, you're in a room, you're in a controlled environment. So even with that little amp, once I opened it up and I had a guitar and I was playing a couple of notes, I was like, oh, wow, this is what it is. So that was the biggest kind of thing. Like now today I have a real gig actually. And this is the first time that I'm actually going to play one of my real amps. So that'll be interesting just to play through a tube amp and open it up. So that might take me a minute to get used to too, just because it's weird how you get used to certain things, and then when they're gone, you're like,
yeah. I know. And living in a New York apartment, as we both know, it's different to that. It's a very different thing. And so tonight you're playing at the Falcon in New York. It's a little upstate New York, which is a cool gig. And you're playing outside, you said, right?
Yeah, it's outside.
Oh, cool. So a lot of questions that we want to talk about. Who were some of your main influences? You're playing, to me, it is when I was looking over your stuff, thinking about what to ask you and talk to you about. You cover so many different styles so well, and there's certainly a lot of funk in your playing, and then your blues playing is great, and then of course the jazz background. So can you kind of go through some of your favorite people who really influenced you, and maybe particular things from them, like a tune or something that really hit you?
Well, I grew up in Israel in the 80s, really. So there was a lot of the heavy metal thing going on, the shred thing, which at the time I really loved. I still like some of it. So that was one part of it, and then the other part of it was I got into jazz really early. I don't know, my brother started to bring jazz records home. So Chick Corea, Kid Jarrett, McLaughlin, Aldi Meola, that was the first things I listened to. I don't know, even George Benson a little bit. So that's kind of how I heard about jazz. And then once I started learning it, which was in a pretty young age actually, then I got more into the guitar players. So in the beginning it was like, I really loved Scott Henderson and Pat Metheny and Holdsworth and those guys. But I remember trying to get any of that stuff, and it was way above my level. I couldn't even figure out what they're doing. But I was lucky enough. I had like two really good teachers in Israel. One was kind of a Berkeley guy, and he basically taught me just like the basic ideas of how this jazz theory is. So then I was able to understand a little more, and then I went to some guy that he was living in New York, but he just moved back to Israel, and he was one of those Barry Harris disciples, the piano player. Yeah. And Barry has this system that he teaches bebop for that, and it's a great system for that. So that teacher got me into that, and that's where I got heavily into bebop. So I would say that probably my heaviest influence was Wes Montgomery. Okay. I was actually a Wes Montgomery clone for a long time. I used to play with my thumb. I had a copy. I had this Epiphone L5, and I used to play all his music. At the height of it, I would probably be able to put a record and play the whole record by heart with the solos. I was really into it. So that was the main thing. Then, a lot of the bebop stuff was a big part of my upbringing, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, Bud Powell, Grant Green, Kenny Burrell, all that kind of. Yeah. And then, but the interesting thing is, at the same time, I always played pop music and rock, and I always played with artists there. Like I played with some famous like singer-songwriter artists there. So in the 80s, I would do that. But I was super into the heavy metal thing. So in one hand I was playing bebop, in the other hand I was into like Greg Howe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
or like Alan or Steve Vai or Satriani. So I had a pretty schizophrenic upbringing, you know. At some point where things started to come together was where at some point I realized that, okay, I got the Wes Montgomery thing. I'm not going to make a career out of that. So I started to play again with the pick. And Jim Hall is the guy, to my opinion, that opened the doors for modern jazz guitar, you know? So I started to listen to him more and to kind of, and then it kind of connected me back into like Pat Metheny and Schofield and Frizzell and Stern, all those guys, because that was the door that was open from like Wes Montgomery went to Jim Hall, and then things open up where everybody can kind of do his own thing. On the other aspect, I started to listen to, you know, I started to be aware of Eric Johnson and Jeff Beck, and then Stevie Ray Vaughan came in. When Stevie Ray Vaughan came in, I got into the blues stuff. So I tried to be a Stevie Ray Vaughan clone, not very successfully, but that's kind of what got me into the blues thing. So I would say that in general, I'm a jazz player that can play rock and some blues, you know?
Gotcha.
That's how I was growing up. And at some point, it just kind of came together as one thing, you know?
Yeah, you know, and it's funny, we've talked to a lot of guys who are, I'm a little older than you, but the growing up in the 80s, and I'm more of a rock guy who plays some jazz, you know, and blues through that thing. Yeah. And we talked about a lot of people. Shane Terry was talking about it a week ago, and in the 80s, it was the heyday of guitar. So all this stuff was happening. It was so great. So, excuse me, I was listening to Halsworth and Yngwie, and like I said, Al Di Meola, and then I was starting to get into real jazz at that point. I'd always kind of had a bit of a fusion thing going on through the Jeff Beck. Then you start getting into Jean-Luc Ponty, like that kind of stuff, the fusiony stuff. Sure. But yeah, it was fun, and what I love is how these guys have influenced us and opened this door to that next generation, and the people who've come after us. When you go on Instagram and see these guys who, it's so readily available, stuff that I don't say worked hard to get, because they work hard to get, but how things have kind of come together now, and you've got a lot more people who have those sort of chops, the jazz background and the rock chops, and it's really kind of fascinating. Yeah.
It really is, yeah. So that's pretty much what, you know, that's pretty much my story and my influences, you know. Mm-hmm. I always liked both. I still like both. As when I was growing up, people told me that I have to make a decision because I can't do both. But I basically told them it's not going to happen. That I like, you know. Yeah. So it was kind of weird, but that's pretty much what it was. You know, whether it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago or now, I always try to listen to different stuff. You know, I like jazz. I like blues. I like rock. I really love songwriting. Like, I just love the Beatles and bands like that. You know, I do recording session because I've done it since I'm a kid. So I'm really into like, you know, songwriting and sounds and stuff like that. So I don't know. Let's put it like that. I have some jazz education. There's people that are more educated than me in jazz, but I have a pretty solid jazz background, you know. Right. And I'm not considering myself as a blues player, but I do my best to learn that language, because I know that a lot of things come from there. You know, of course, Hendrix was a big influence at some point. Sure,
of course. You know, and it's interesting when you post on Instagram. We talk a little about that. You've been doing a lot of Instagram posting. It's cool. What I love about hearing you playing, you'll do giant steps reharmonized with working against the metronome in different ways, and then you have a version that you playing on a country kind of tune.
Yeah.
Recently, that had some really cool changes in it as well. So. You're one of the players that really, and this, I mean, it's a big compliment. Everything sounds legitimate, which is really great. So when you play blues, I don't feel like someone who's playing the blues. You know what I'm talking about? Like, or someone who's playing jazz or these kind of things. And it's a very difficult thing to do, but you do it really naturally. And I think it just comes from you just love music, like I do, and I feel like we're fans of good music. Yeah. Whatever it may be, it's just what we're into, you know.
Yeah, I just like music. I like to play. You know, I have a good time doing it. So it's like, I don't know. I think styles, like the ideas of putting music in certain boxes limits you, you know what I mean? Like, obviously there's a style to everything, and it's good to be aware of it, but when it comes down to it, you do whatever you want, you know what I mean? If you like rap, then do rap. It's like, you know, it's all based on some musical formats or ideas, you know?
You know, and the stuff that you're doing, and it's your music. People come and hear what you do, and they want to hear you do your thing. And that's kind of, even though you do some sessions and things like that, but you're just really interested in being your own player, which is, I think that's important. And you carry that voice through everything that you do. And I think that that's cool, as opposed to, I'm going to try to do my best Albert King here or something like that. I think that's all.
I was never a good, how to say it, impersonator. Like, I was never good at, you know, I would be able to transcribe stuff, but I think when I did the West thing, I was pretty good at it. But, you know, I was never super good at doing the Stevie Ray Vaughan thing. I never really quite figured out how to do the heavy metal thing, but I was practicing the ideas of how things get there, you know. So, like, you know, I'm not really good at figuring out exactly how this player played this chord or this line, you know.
Yeah.
I'm kind of more thinking about the musical aspect of it, you know, whether I like the line or just the melody and I do it my own way or something like that.
So when you go about songwriting, do you have any kind of process? Does it come from like kind of noodling around on the guitar that you find a tune, or do you? What's your impetus, and how do you sit when you want to write a new tune? What's your? I know it changes probably all the time, but
the way it's been going all those years is before I started making records. First of all, I never planned to be a solo artist. It wasn't that I came to New York and go like, oh, I'm going to be a solo artist. That was never the intention. It was never in a part of my mind. I just wanted to play with good players. The whole thing started kind of by mistake because I started a band just to be able to play and to kind of show people that I'm around and what I do, not knowing that it actually works against you, because then people sees you as a band leader and then you don't get calls to do gigs. But
that's so true.
I know. Well, but for the process, I needed music to play in a club, you know, so I started to write for that. Now, what happened is at some point, a few friends of mine heard some recordings from the bitter end where I used to play every week, and they told me, hey, it's got a really great vibe, you should do a record with that. So then I did that live record. It was my first record. It was live at the bitter end, really. So it was tunes that I just had because I wrote those tunes to be able to play, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I always wrote music for projects, meaning if I had a trio that I played the bitter end, I would write music for that. If I had some recording session with a quartet or whatever, I would write music for that. So that's how it started. Now, when I started to do actual records, like studio records, I mostly would get a concept in my head of, okay, this is what I'm going for. And then when I have a concept in my head, I start to collect ideas. And usually collecting ideas usually comes from just noodling around on the guitar, or just listening to records and suddenly hearing like a cool bass line or a cool drum beat, and then I'll program it or something, and then I'll build a tune of that. So that's how I've been kind of writing all those years. It's mostly surrounding, like it's mostly has to do with the fact that I have to have a concept for a record, you know? Like when I did Twisted Blues, Volume 1 and Volume 2, I had this idea. I wanted to play over blues forms, but pretty much open them harmonically. So that was a good start, and then I started to write all these tunes that was blues influence. When I did the last record that I did, the Boogaloogaloo, is more like a boogaloo record, so it's more of that era. This next record that's coming out is the same thing, you know what I mean? So it's that kind of stuff. I write when I have to write for a project. Like, I haven't written in a long time because I finished a record and I don't have anything to write for right now, so I just don't do it.
I find that I'm the same way. I have to set up something to actually start
Yeah.
writing? Because there's so much stuff to do, there's so much stuff to work on, and there's the business of music, and then how you make your living doing it. So when you have the focus, and it's the funniest thing you bring up that earlier about being your own band leader. People, when I was playing with my trio a lot, they're just oh you just do that, right? You're not you don't.
It's I still find it amazing how people perception is when they see you or somebody do that. It's almost like it's like a mental thing where they go like, oh, he's his own thing. He's not going to be able to do the other thing or whatever, or they don't feel comfortable because you're your own thing. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's pretty amazing.
Or they think that since my gig is guitar centric, yours is guitar centric, that's just the only way you play.
Yeah.
Like, oh, he's just gonna play. He's just gonna want to solo the whole time, or something like that. You're like, no, no. This is my gig, and
Yeah.
it's a funny thing, and people find it also too. Like, a friend of mine played slide on a few sessions, and everybody just kind of thought of him as a slide guitar player. It's like, no, I can play a little slide, but I'm not a slide guitar player. So
it's pretty weird how people's perceptions are. They gonna,
I know.
I kind of gave up on it because I've done a lot of records here in New York and stuff with different people and different friends and stuff. But even my really close friends that I've done records with, it's almost like in the back of their minds, I'm still that other guy because I have a solo career. You know what I mean? So, it's just like human nature is a weird thing.
It's a really weird thing. Yeah, and I didn't know you could do that. And like, well, it's been all around. It's obvious that I do that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so you start off at the bitter end, and then you started playing with Will Lee and Anton Fig. Can you talk about how you started? You're always playing with these great musicians, obviously, but how did that initially start, that you started playing with those guys, which I think really obviously elevated the visibility and all that? Yeah, if you could talk a little bit.
Well, the way it started was when I moved to New York, again, I wanted to play. So I went to there was some party I moved to New York in the end of the summer of '96, and then I remember it pretty well. In the winter, sometime around December or January, there was a little birthday jam for a drummer, and so I went to that jam and I played. I sat in. There was a bunch of studio guys, New York studio guys, that were hanging out because that drummer was a studio guy here, and this bass player came to me after we played. His name is Frank Canino. He's a great bass player, a great friend of mine. He says like, oh, wow, you can really play the blues. It was like, I don't know. So he used to have a band that used to play at the place called La Barbette. It was a club in Midtown, a great club that used to be a really famous studio. I forgot the name of the studio, but a lot of really great records were recorded there. And then they turned it into a club, which was a beautiful club with all this wood.
It was nice, yeah.
Really beautiful. So he used to play his band there, and he told me, hey, come and sit in with my band. So I went there, and from some odd reason, the sound man at that club and the guy that used to be the booking agent really liked me, liked my playing. And also I was like 24, I was pretty young, so they go like, so they kind of really liked me. They dug me. So every time they call me, I'm like, oh, come sit in with this band, with this band. And then at some point, they just gave me a gig. The guy gave me a gig. It's like, hey, play once a month there. So I had a paying gig in New York. It was once a month. Yep. And then that guy hooked me up with Anton Fig.
Okay.
Because they wanted, nobody knew who I was, but maybe if there would be a couple of guys with names, maybe that will work. So I played it for a year or two till this place closed, and it was just like once a month. But I was able to call a lot of different people because it paid a little bit,
Yep.
I called Mark Egan. I don't know, Chris Parker. I don't know who else. Like Bernard Wright played with me. Adam Holtzman. Like people that were just kind of guys that I wanted to play in New York with. Mm-hmm. So that was the beginning of it. And then I did a little recording, I think. It was not great or anything like that. But I always wanted to play with Will. And Anton was playing with Will at the Letterman show. So at that time, I already started to play the bitter end more regularly. And at that time, also, Keith Carlock moved to town pretty much at the same time that I did. So we started to play. I started to do my trio or quartets with either Anton or Keith.
Right.
That's been going on for years, actually. So that's how it started. And then when I did my first solo, that Live in the Bitter End album, I already had James Genius playing bass and Reggie Washington, who's another great bass player.
Yeah.
So when we did that record, Will knew of me. I knew Will a little bit, but I wasn't like tight with him or anything like that. And then I remember one time, remember the Metropolitan, that place in the Upper East Side where everybody used to play?
Yeah.
So I remember hanging out there one time, and it was right after I recorded my live album. So I guess there was started to be a little buzz about what I do, maybe, I don't know. And Will kind of came to me and was like, "Why don't you call me to play with you?" I was like, "All right." And that was since then we've done like hundreds and hundreds of gigs together, you know.
Yeah. Well, what's great about it's a great story, and it's just a matter of just being out there, and being cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the like. Besides, obviously, you can play. You know, this wouldn't happen because you're a badass, but it's this age-old story that everybody would talk about. It's just things happen because you were there, you were out there, and you were cool.
Yeah. You know, another thing I would say about Will, which I learned later, he told me that is, I remember giving Anton a tape of us playing, and I was like, "Hey, can you maybe ask Will if he wants to do it, to play?" And I never heard back. And years later, he told me, I was like, "Yeah, you know, I heard the tape, and I thought like the writing wasn't there. Like he thought that, you know, you can play a little bit or something, but there wasn't any real good tunes or anything like that." And by the time Will started to play with me, I already had music from that live album. So that was a bunch of tunes that were okay. Some of them are good, and then I already started to write more. So when he joined, I already started to have a thing. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. Cool. It's funny. I mean, I've lived in New York obviously since '89. I've been in New York City, and I grew up in Jersey, and I was born in New York City. So okay. So it was funny, like you were doing stuff at the same time. We never really intersected at that time when you were playing with Keith. I was playing with Keith at the 55 bar, which was the craziest.
Oh, really?
I had a steady gig there for like 8 years in the 90s and early thousands. And then it's a ridiculous story where the new ownership took over. We had a crazy singer who, bless her heart, she like insulted the owner on the microphone. And
really? That's not
that was it. You know, it's just one of those kind of things. You're like, all right, well, great. But it was kind of funny. Like we hadn't really intersected until much later. You know, which is crazy. I don't know. You know, and I only started to play the 55 bar much later. Like I was playing La Barbette in the beginning, and then I was playing my jam. My thing was the Bitter End. Although I played other places, and 55 bar is as you know, is notorious for it's really hard to get a gig there. Yes.
So I tried a couple of times, and I may have played there maybe 2 or 3 times, but I never really was a part of the family till I guess I got a little more of a name. Then the owner one time saw me in the streets, go, "Hey, you go want to play the club?" I was like, "Sure." So then I started to play the 55 more often, but it was way later in my New York career that I got in there, you know. It was probably like at least 10 years after or something.
We were there with the previous owner for many years.
Quiva, yeah.
Before Quiva.
Oh, before?
Yeah.
Who was before her?
I don't remember his name. We were always booked by his secretary. And what happened was it was kind of like a bluesy rock band, and we had a great female singer. And I did a record with the band. It was called Flytrap, and we were there every other Friday, and we packed the place because it was like blues rock, and she was saucy in the microphone, and you know, and we did really well. And then when it changed hands with Quiva, just you know, when you're not the only person in the band, and then those two didn't really mix very well, you know, and then there was the falling out, and I got knocked out in the shrapnel, and then it became hard to get a gig there for me, like persona non grata at that point. So, you know, with all the old bartenders, they let all the old crew go at that point, basically.
Oh,
You know,
really?
and they kept Wayne. You know, obviously, like Wayne and Mike continued to play there because they were steadies. But you know, they had a. It wasn't me and Queever had the falling out. It was the singer, and then it suddenly became hard to get a gig. And they're like, "Well, we can give you a Monday night at 7." I'm like, "I played every other Friday, like from
Yeah.
10 to 3 in the morning, making fill in the play." Yeah, so it became whatever. That was a long time ago. It's very different now again, but
Yeah, when I went to New York, I used to hang a lot there because of Mike and Wayne,
yeah,
and that was Weaver was around, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But I have played there, and then Keith used to play there a lot, so I used to hang there. But I haven't. It took me years and years and years to get a gig there.
It was funny. I was doing a gig.
And it was also when I didn't ask for it, I would get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. One time I was playing with Keith. He's like, "I can't do the next few gigs." I'm like, "Oh, okay. What's up?" He's like, "I got the gig with Sting," and I'm like, "Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
You may go." You know,
Yeah.
like crappy bi-weekly gig when you got a gig with Sting. Anyway, so everybody got questions for Oz. We would love to hear them, and I just want to say hi to everybody who's online because a lot of Keith Williams. Thanks, Keith. 5 Watt World. Jason Carter. David Skinner. We have Jim DeVore, S.E. Nesbitt, everybody. We got Tom Manette, Mike Anderson, a lot of regulars. So thanks everybody for being here. Manuel, sorry, my contacts. Miguel, sorry man, Miguel, of course. Dave. All right. So any questions? Let us know. And I've got a few more things I want to ask. Obviously, so let's talk a little bit about. You talked about gear because we're kind of you're known for pedals and sounds and things. And how does do you want to talk a little bit like like for instance, what amp are you going to use tonight? Just out of nerd guitar talk.
I have a tool. Well, I normally use either a Tool Rock or a Marshall.
Yeah.
I have some old Fenders, so I do use them sometimes. But when I play my electric trio, I need volume, so usually my Fenders don't carry that as well.
Right.
And if I play softer stuff, then I can use my Fenders. So I have a Tool Rock combo that they made for me, and that's kind of the only loud amp that I have at home right now because all my stuff is at storage and my cartridge guy doesn't really work because of the whole COVID thing. So I have a TS1 that is in a combo, 112. That's fantastic. So I'm just bringing that.
Heavy. I just took mine out and put it in a little head.
It's actually super. It's really, really heavy.
I know that's why I took mine out and put it in I have the Bloomfield. I had it in a combo, and I was like, 65 pounds and bring.
Oh yeah, it's really heavy to carry, but it's good to have as a. I can do a real gig with it. Like I can do a loud gig with it, and it's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know how loud we're gonna play today. I'm playing a little bit more jazzy stuff, but still.
Then you're outdoors, so it carries,
Outdoors, yeah, because a Deluxe doesn't have much volume, and and the one thing that I don't like is when amps start to kind of sag and crap out. Then that's awful.
It's awful, yeah, because you can't. There's no place to go, and yeah, it's the worst. I'd rather people see like we talk about smaller wattage amps. I can't really handle them for the most part because there's so many good master volume amps, and if your amp starts crapping out, and then you put out a pedal, you get more distortion. Like I don't want more distortion, I just want more dynamics, and then so the volume gets.
Small amps are good for playing in small places when you don't need a lot of volume. Then the big amps are useless.
Yes, it's true.
So you have to almost know where you're playing and know the room, and then you'll just bring the right amp for the occasion, really.
Yeah. And then so you've got a pretty varying pedal board, right? Or is it stay consistent? Because I always seem when you post it, always seems like it's changing. Or
yeah, well, it's kind of the only thing that changed recently was, I've always been a big Line 6 guy because I use the looper and I also use a couple of pedals, a couple of effects in there that are only on the Line 6, and I've been kind of making them they're kind of my signature thing in a way. So the only big difference was switching from the M9 or the M13 to the HX, which I'm still kind of going back and forth. And then before that, there was all those green pedals, like all the old. So everything else is, I still use a TS-808, a tube screamer, and I still use I have an exotic signature pedal, but it's basically an AC booster and an RC booster together. So I always use those two things. So those are pretty much my main sounds. And then I always use an Octavia. So any Octavia will do, really. I use the Dunlop stuff. But last couple of years I've been using a fuzz. So I have like a fuzz face and all that kind of stuff. But I found it really hard to use it live because it changes the sound so much from like the sound of your guitar.
Yeah.
Once you hit it, it's almost like you have to set up your amp for that pedal only, you know?
I agree.
I use Venmo pedals, and they made a signature fuzz that I use. It's basically you know, I used to use the Shank fuzz. He has this really good fuzz, but I kept asking them for more gain. They would send me those pedals, like, can you make more gain? I just needed for more gain, and they made this fuzz one time for me, and they brought it when I was playing in Japan, and I played it, and I still use that pedal, that one that they brought me, and then they made a signature thing. So that's pretty much my main sound, and then I go through some kind of Leslie simulator. I do this, DSL has this great pedal called Rotosim. I don't know what else do I have. A tremolo of some sort, maybe a phaser, univibe. It depends on the situation. And then delays is a big deal for me because I used to not play with a reverb at all, but now I have a reverb pedal because my amps don't have reverb.
Right.
So I have a reverb pedal, but I have DD7s for slap and just like a regular delay. And all the other stuff, I used to use a Memory Man, but now all the other stuff is in the line 6, really, like some weird delays and weird tremolos and then the loopers. So it has been the same thing for a long time. It's just that I don't know. The big switch again was that HX, so I had to redo my pedal boards for that. But
it's a great unit, the HX. They really, I feel like they kind of took it that next level from the M9 and things like that. Yeah. So I've got some questions here for you. All right, so Keith Williams of 5 Watt World. How is your approach different for playing in a trio versus a quartet?
It's not. The only thing that would be different is if you write for a trio, then you want to write stuff that you can cover more ground on a guitar, meaning maybe play some harmony with the melodies or add some more effects or something that will make it sound fuller. And when you play with a quartet, you already have the chords in the background, so you can be a little freer. So it's more about the writing than the actual playing. Like when I play with a quartet or a trio, I pretty much play the same way. But I would write different for a quartet or a trio, you know?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
So Powell Randolph, hi, wow, man. Hey, Powell, what's up? Went to college with Powell. Drummer question, which is great to have.
Oh, my God.
It's a drummer online. When you have different drummers play your music, do you welcome their interpretation of the songs?
Absolutely. That's why I called them.
Right answer. Yeah, of course. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah. Well, here's the way I do it. The way I've done it always. When I write a tune, I come up with a drum groove and usually the bass line. I record it on Pro Tools, but it's programmed. You know, so I play bass, but I program the drums. So it gives the music, whoever I get to play with, it gives them the idea of what it's supposed to be, but they interpretate that, and that's why I like it, because I don't know, Weckel would play it different than Vinny, and Vinny would play it different than Anton, Anton would play it different than Carlock, and so on and so on. So I like that stuff. That's what makes the music interesting. And every drummer that you play with, a drummer is basically the sound of your band, really. So yes. Every drummer gives, you know, his own character. They have to kind of play in the general idea of the groove, you know, but they would do their interpretation for sure. And it's the same with bass too. Like the bass lines are specific, but they're just an idea to work off, you know.
And it keeps it exciting.
Yeah.
as a player.
Yeah, it keeps it interesting. Yeah, of course.
Uh,
Yeah.
and you played some pretty good drummers.
Not
Yeah,
bad.
not bad, right? Okay, when this is from Tom Annette. He saw you sitting with Matt Schofield at the Iridium. Might have been an Albert King tune. What would be the challenges of playing with someone like Matt?
I think the challenging, it's not, it's, I would make it a broader question. The challenge is when you sit in with anybody, it's challenging because first of all, they already played an hour or so. They're all warm up and, they have their sound, and then you sit in, you plug into an amp that you don't know of, you haven't played a note before. So that's the biggest challenge. Matt is great, obviously, but the challenge is more like just to be able to, it's not even about feeling comfortable because you won't feel comfortable. It's just about delivering whatever it is in any situation. And I always tell people as a joke that I'm like the king of sitting in with famous people because I always sit in at the Beacon with like Warren Haynes or with Wizzle or with like other people. And it's so stressful because, although they're great and they're friends and whatever, and, it's still so stressful to just go on stage and plug into something you never plugged in before. You don't know what sound you're going to get. You don't know anything. And you have like thousands of people watching. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the big challenge, is just be able to jump in without being warmed up or getting used to the sound or anything and just play.
I agree. That is the most difficult thing.
Yeah.
I saw you and I felt for you. You played great, but saw you at the BB King's for a Close with Eric Johnson sitting in.
Oh, with Eric. I've sat in with Eric many, many times. Yeah.
And he was on fire that night. That was one of those nights. He's always great, but this was that night. I was there with Matt Schofield. Actually, he and I were in the audience with Christine, and it was just he was real. He's always great, of course, but this was like a really spectacularly great night. And then he calls you up and he asks you to sit in on Zap, which is that up-tempo thing.
Yeah.
And all I could think of for you at that moment was like, that poor bastard.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
can you imagine, like, I play with Eric many, many times. Yeah. It's great, but I do it more for sports, what I mean? It's almost like it's gonna, because what are you gonna do? It's fucking Eric Johnson, and he's already played on stage, like, burning for an hour and a half or something, and he's already been on tour for a month, so his chops are way up. And the other thing about, this is a funny story about playing with Eric, is the first couple of times when we used to do this, like now he's got an amp somewhere, like he's got another amp, so you just plug into that. But there used to be times, especially when we played BB King's, it happened more than once that I actually plug into one of his amps.
Oh.
And I've played his rig before. There's nothing you can do to get out of that sound. Like every note you play sounds like Eric Johnson, And that's problematic. I remember one time I was playing to his Marshall. I don't know if it was a tube screamer on it or whatever, or a fuzz phaser. Every freaking, like whenever I tried to do a pentatonic thing, I had to stop because it just sounded like a bad version of him,
Yeah.
So that's a very weird experience, and I've done it a couple of times where I was like, oh shit. But now, at least the last couple of times we played, he's got another amp, so there's another aspect of it which was a lot of times you don't hear yourself at all.
Yeah.
Like the last two times I played with him, the amp was on the other side of the room. I couldn't hear shit, but it doesn't matter. I just do it for the sports of it. I don't know.
That's the only way I go into it too, is like, it is what it is, and you have to just go in with it laughing about it. Like, this is just gonna be fun, and I'm just gonna treat it like it's fun, and
Yeah. I gotta say one thing. There used to be when the Allman Brothers were still around, I used to sit in with them sometimes at the Beacon, and I gotta say that as intimidated as it is to stand next to Warren and Derek, the vibe was so loose and relaxed that when you used to go and plug in, it was just like you're in a living room, and that's kind of the same vibe with Warren Haynes, the same because I sat in with Warren like many, many times, and it's the same thing. It's just kind of a hang, and they make it not a big deal. Like, it's like they're on stage. It's just like they're in the living room. So that helps a lot, you know?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You just kind of hopefully that it's a cool vibe. I can imagine. I mean, I've heard that. I've not sat in with them, but they're yeah, chill people and they're your friends, and it just feels like you're jamming with somebody.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a great question because it is tough walking up on that stage, especially like you said. They've got their gear, they've got it dialed in. They've been playing for a few hours. They're all warmed up, and you're like, "Hey, come on up!" And then they pick the fast tempo, and then you're like, "Oh."
But I'll tell you, the other thing is like when I play in Austin, and I even done it one time in New York. Like Eric would sit in with me, then he would have to be the one to hit this shit.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's when you gave him the JC 120 to play through.
Yeah, exactly.
How's it feel now, man? How's it feel? You know, and then also what you start to realize is that you have to play to what is happening at that moment, right? Where you're like, okay, this tone is not happening, so I'm just going to have to play to the tone as best as I can and make it work.
There's nothing you can do. You know, it was interesting. Right before the COVID thing happened, I was in LA for a couple of weeks, and Dweezil Zappa was playing in a club. So he goes like, "Hey man, come sit in." So I came and sat in, and Dweezil thing is weird because they play in ears, so there's not much going on in the stage, but he has this little amp that just sits there all the time. So, actually, that gig I wasn't playing that amp. There was a real amp. So I was playing that amp, but the sound guy actually blasted me in the monitors with the guitar, and that's impossible to play.
Yeah.
If I hear myself from the monitor loud, it's impossible. So as soon as I played one note, I immediately went like this, cut it off, and I ran to the guy and said, "Yeah, turn it off." And once he turned it off, I was able to play. But it could have been really, really bad. Like if he wouldn't turn it off, I would have probably just go like this, you know?
Yeah, because when you're in that situation, there's nothing. Yeah, but monitors are the worst. I agree. Yeah, I hate the sound of them. And it's just blowing up right in your face, and then it takes you out of the music, right? It takes you out of the band, and suddenly you're like,
I'd rather not hear myself than hear myself through a monitor, you know?
Yeah, I'd rather just kind of pick up whatever the stage thing as I can and walk as close to something as I can. Yeah, it's terrible.
You know, I'll tell you another tip about Eric actually, and it's something that I noticed. When he plays on the stage, his Marshalls are kind of not only to the side of the stage, they kind of tilt a little to the side, so he doesn't really hear, the way he hears his Marshall is very muffled on stage, which in a way, like he doesn't hear it maybe as good, but it kind of helps you play, especially legato, because you hear more of the echo of it.
Yep.
Because when you play an amp right in your head, you hear everything, every little thing. That's hard to do also. So I think there has to be a kind of middle ground where you hear what you hear, but there has to be space from it also that you can kind of feel comfortable, you know, at least for me. And I noticed that with him, you know. He almost like to get away from his amps almost, you know.
I think it's just, well, it sounds more natural to me. Like when you're right in front of your amp, especially if you're using the Marshall with the close back, it's like a beam. And, you know, that's why when you go to a gig and somebody's got a Marshall, I'm like, I'm going to stand over here because that sounds the way it's supposed to sound to me. And same, so the same thing when I'm playing on gigs too. And well, you know, playing with Robin was a real challenge because he's really, really loud. Really loud.
Yeah.
And the only thing on stage I could hear was him. And then I'm so not used to playing at that volume. It's a real challenge to like, how do I angle? Where do I stand? And how do I...
Plus, the other thing is I played many, many times with two guitars. I love it, but it gets loud. It's just challenging to play with two guitars. There's nothing to do about it. It's just what it is.
I agree. Absolutely. All right, a few more questions. Yeah. Okay, Starchild, does Oz customize his guitars at all?
The only thing I know, the answer is no. The only thing I do is on my Strats, I send my bridge pickup to Lindy Fralin, and he overwounds it.
Okay.
Pretty much. I don't know if all the way, but a lot, because I use the bridge a lot, and I can't use a regular Fender bridge. They're just too thin.
Gotcha.
That's the only thing I do. And I have the tone on the bridge, you know.
Right. Standard. Do you have a tone on the middle pickup or no?
Yeah. Okay. I have the tone on the neck in the middle, and the last tone is on the bridge.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
But that's standard.
I'm looking through other questions. What was it like playing with Cyndi Lauper?
I didn't play with Cyndi Lauper. I did play with Cyndi Lauper once. She's a total nut job. It's probably the worst experience you can imagine. I produced. I swear, I'm like, she's a complete nut.
I know somebody who worked with her as well, and the same.
No, it's just like the worst. I produced a record for somebody, and she came and sang on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was by far the worst session I've ever experienced. I was the producer, so I was just on the side, kind of letting her do her thing. But the engineer that I hired was a serious dude, like a guy that had Grammys and stuff. And after we ended the session, he goes like, "That was the worst session I've ever done in my life." And I was like, "Sorry, dude."
Yeah.
So that was that. And then there was another thing that was in the house band, and we played a song with her, but she's very, very uncomfortable to work with, you know?
Yeah, that's a friend of mine played.
I gotta clear something. The reason I have so many people on my biography that I play with is I play with a bunch of people, and I've done some tours, but not that many as a sideman. I've done some. And the reason for it is because sometimes I got lucky to get called to play in those house bands for like the Songwriter Hall of Fame and things like that. So when you do that, you end up playing with a lot of name guys. Like the last one I did was a year ago, and we played with like Justin Timberlake and like Bonnie Raitt and a bunch of other people. You know what I mean? So sometimes you get one of those gigs and you like play with, actually the greatest moment of my life was like a bunch of years ago. I did the Songwriter Hall of Fame, and I played Walk This Way with Aerosmith. I played the rhythm guitar for that.
Oh, that's great.
Like it was Joe Perry and Steven Taylor. And I remember even asking Joe, I was like, "Joe, what do I do?" He's like, "Yeah, don't worry, just play the, So that's the reason why a lot of those names are on there, because I do, if I get lucky, I get called to do those things, and it's awesome. You get to play with we played with like Foreigner and like many Sting, people like that.
Yeah.
But I haven't, a lot of those names, I haven't toured with them. I just did like a recording or a show or something, just like once.
Yeah, but it's still doing that work. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You're still playing with them, and then they make for great stories too. Okay, so off topic. Someone wants to know what your speakers are. Those hi-fi speakers are behind you.
Oh, I don't remember the name. I bought them from a friend of mine. I have a really nice stereo system.
It looks that way.
I think Energy or something.
Oh.
I don't know. They're great. It's really good. I can listen to. I still buy CDs because I like to listen to music properly. So once in a while, when I'm in the mood, I'll put a CD and listen to this system. It's great.
Do you have a turntable?
No, I'm not into that.
Yeah, I understand. Well, it's always a thing where I start thinking about getting a good hi-fi thing, and I'm like, well, the money I have to put towards that versus the money I have to put towards, you know what I mean? So I just end up running things through the studio monitors.
The problem was when you get to this kind of stuff, the hi-fi stuff, man, talking about a endless pit of money.
I know. I've got
And I have friends of mine that got me into it because they're audiophile nuts. Like I have a friend of mine that has a system in his house that's like $50,000, and it sounds unbelievable. I have another friend of mine that has a system for like $100,000. You know what I mean? It's like you can really go pretty far with it. You hear the difference for sure. Like it's pretty mind blowing. You hear records and you go like, "Wow, I didn't hear this before." But it's an expensive hobby. So what I have here is really good, but
you're done.
It doesn't. I'm more into just getting used to the sound of this and be done with it,
Yeah, it's the term that people use for the hi-fi stuff is palpable. Like how palpable is the sound? Like I have a friend who's into it, and he's got the same kind of crazy German tube system with the floating turntable. I don't know. He won't tell me how much it was, but it's easily got to be $100,000. And I'm thinking. Yeah,
that's.
I mean,
there's cables. You can buy a power cable for $1,000.
I know. Yeah, for cleaner sound. And then people start to try to hawk that stuff on amps too, like, for your amp, buy this power cable. I'm like, nah, I'm good. Because the second somebody hits a cymbal, it's all gone anyway, right? I mean.
I would say one thing. Those things do make a difference because I put cables. I got friends of mine gave me fancy cables, and it does clean the sound for sure, but I don't think with guitar amps that's what you need.
That I agree with you. That's my point. So I don't want the guitar amp to be too hi-fi.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm talking about guitar amps when they start trying to sell the super high-end power cable. I'm like, no, Marshalls sound like, that's my Marshalls from. It's just the cable's stuck in there. It's from 1972. Like it's what it, yeah, like and it sounds the way it's supposed to sound. So yeah.
It's more important for guitar amps. The current out of the wall is more important.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you do anything about to regulate that, or you just kind of go with what?
No, I don't have patience for it.
I mean,
and also, like, I'm not gonna carry another big box to regulate the power going to a gig or touring. It's just not gonna happen.
Yeah, and people talk about that, and then then at that point you're supposed to have your amps biased for that current. So like in New York, if it's 120 coming out of the wall, and then you suddenly running it at 110 through like one of those boxes, it's still not optimal. Like, so I'm just like, fuck it. I'm just gonna.
I only did one gig that I remember clearly. We played this club. It was somewhere in, I forgot where, maybe I don't know where, Pennsylvania or something. And it was me and actually John Harrington's band, John Harrington guitar player from Steely Dan. And I brought I think it was my Turok, and he brought a Bluetooth.
Yeah.
And I remember playing, and I was like, wow, my sound really sucked so hard. And he played, and after that he goes like, man, the power in these walls are awful. You really felt it on both amps. But it's rare that it happens. I only remember once really when this thing happened, when you can really, really feel it. Like you go like, wow, this is impossible.
Yeah, there's something really wrong here.
Yeah.
Somebody asked if you could just play through Giant Steps for a minute, if you want to.
No.
Too early. Good. Okay. No problem. I understand. Hey, go to his Instagram page. He does a bunch of versions of it that are fantastic. And then you did this really great reharm, I think, in the baritone guitar.
Yeah.
That was super cool. So just go to his Instagram page, sign up, follow his Instagram page. Hey, Oz has also got a YouTube page. It's just YouTube/Oznoy.
Yeah, I think so.
Sign up for that because, same like with mine. If you're new here, please ring the bell. As Phil's been saying, sign up for the channel. It really helps us. And just because we start posting stuff in here, it's great to have people check it out. Blah, blah, blah. Look at some questions here, and we can finish up. Jason Laughlin's in the house. Hey, Jason, what's up, man? Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I think we're kind of winding down to questions. Anything One Wolf, you got a new record coming out. Can you just talk about that real fast before we go?
Yeah, it's called Snapdragon, and it was supposed to come out already, but because of this whole situation, we pushed it. So it's gonna come out November 5th or 6th or something like that. It's basically the last record I've done was called Boogaloogaloo. It's like a boogaloo kind of record, and the story behind it is I recorded I recorded too much music, so I split it into 2 records. So this next album that's coming out, Snapdragon, is basically the volume 2 of the Boogaloo album that I did. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, cool. Who's on it?
Who's not on it?
Okay.
I have the rhythm section is Vinny Colaiuta and Dennis Chambers and Dave Weckl, and then Willie and John Patitucci and James Genus. And Brian Charette plays keyboards on everything. And I have a bunch of different guests. Like actually Wallace Roney played on it before he passed. My friend Adam Rogers played on a tune with me. Dave Kikoski. I can't remember now. I have to look. There's a bunch of people on it. I like to have guests on songs just to kind of keep it interesting.
Yeah, no, totally. Sorry, I got distracted. I just found out Peter Green died.
Oh shit! Really?
Yeah, just now. Wow, I'm a huge fan, but obviously, so Peter Green, co-founder of Fleetwood Mac, dies peacefully in his sleep at age 73.
Oh wow,
that's a bummer. That's to bring things down. I'm a big fan of his. Obviously, he's not been well for 40 years, but that's a total bummer. Sorry, to bring that down, just to announce that here. Well, back to that. So the record's coming out. I wanted to say thanks so much for being here, man. And everybody, just go to Oz's website. He's got a bunch of great instructional material. And like, if you, as I always say, is TrueFire stuff I know directly that if you buy it through his website, he'll get a higher percentage of that. So if you're interested in his TrueFire material, which is really great, please purchase it through his site or anything like that. Your records are available through probably like Bandcamp and things like that as well, or
Everywhere there's records, they're available.
yep. So help him out. If you like his music, just don't stream it, buy it. We'd appreciate that. So like I said, guys, I'm just taking the few weeks off of the interview stuff just because it's the summer and I've been doing it. So it'd be kind of fun to get back into everything at full bore in September. And we're going to have Kirk Fletcher and Keith Williams is going to be on, and Greg Koch and Rick Beato's coming on, and a whole bunch of other people. So I'm still doing every Wednesday at 4 p.m. for the lesson. And please follow me on Instagram, follow Oz on Instagram. And yeah, man, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, cool. So thanks, everybody. We will see you soon, and R.I.P. Peter Green. Hey, thanks, man.